All right, now you've probably heard about irregular verbs before. Many of the most basic vocabulary in English is their irregular verbs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But first, let's think about Spanish. How do you know that all of these are the same word in Spanish? So think about it. We have the verb here in the middle of the star, caminar. And all the little different forms of the verbs around it are different forms of caminar. Caminan, caminas, caminaste, caminare. All of those are forms of the verb caminar. Now think about how you know that all of these are part of the same word. Maybe you thought, well, they look similar, right? They start with the same base. So they all start with camin, right? And then we go changing the endings to indicate the tense of the verb. This is a regular verb in Spanish. Now, think about this. How do you know that all of these are the same word in Spanish? You'll see here in the middle of the star the verb ser, one of the most frequently used and important verbs in Spanish. And all around it, we have different forms of ser. Son, eres, ha sido, era. All of them are forms of ser, and you know that they are, but they don't look the same, right? They don't have that base form like caminar has. Now, you know that they're all part of the same verb because you grew up speaking Spanish or you learned Spanish. And that part of learning a language is learning the forms of the irregular verbs. Now, when you're learning a second language, you just have to memorize these irregular forms. So if you look at this little chart on the left, regular verbs are most of the verbs that you have to learn. You add normal or expected endings to them in English, for example, ed for past. You apply the same pattern to all the verbs, and an example is the verb walk. But for irregular verbs, you have the very most commonly used and sometimes basic vocabulary words in English are also irregular verbs. The tenses are formed differently or unusually. They don't follow a pattern as clearly as the regular verbs, but as I'm going to show you, they do follow a pattern, just not the most regular pattern. The only way to learn them is you must memorize the irregular forms. And some examples are the verbs have and be. All right, now that's the difference between regular and irregular verbs. Now we're going to look at this semester's vocabulary list. All right, here it is. Now, this vocabulary list is divided into 3 parts, and I'm going to explain the parts to you. So first of all, you'll see this is called Vocabulary Group A. And on the left, you'll see the base form of the verb. Then in the middle is the definition. Then you'll see the past simple form and the past participle form. Remember, this semester we're focusing on past participles, but you also need to know the past simple form. So let's take a look at some of these. So we have the verb break. The past simple is broke. The past participle is broken. We have bring, brought, brought. Buy, bought, bought. Choose, chose, chosen. Drive, drove, driven. Okay, you're going to start to see here a few patterns. One is sometimes the past simple and the past participle are the same. Sometimes they're different. And on this list, if they're different, they follow this pattern. The pattern where you add an N to the end. So you have broke, broken, chose, chosen, drove, driven, ate, eaten, fell, fallen, flew, flown. Again, they all vary a little bit, and that's part of memorizing the irregular verbs. So this list, you can see the rule for this list. The past participle forms in this part of the list, in Group A, end in EN or UGHT. Those ending in UGHT have the same form for simple past and past participle. So the idea is that as you're studying these groups of irregular verbs, even though they're irregular, you're looking for patterns. Okay, so there's group A. Let's review group B. Group B has a different pattern. Okay, so if you look over here, we have build, built, built. Deal, past simple is dealt, past participle is dealt. Feel, we have fell, and this actually should be felt. Find, found, and found. So if you look here, both the simple past and the past participle have the same forms in this list. It makes it a little bit easier to memorize things from group B. Finally, group C, we have all the rest. They're all a little bit different, and many of these in group C have a vowel change. So we have become, became, become, run, ran, run, begin, began, begun. Okay, you'll see we have a vowel change between the past simple and the past participle. Ring, rang, rung, that's a vowel change. So we also have these four at the end, which can be regular or irregular. So you can either add the ed or use this irregular form. That's group C. Now we have about 20 words in each list, and we're going to break them up and study them as groups A, B, and C, just to try to make it a little bit easier for you. On the final exam, they'll come all mixed together. And on the final exam, you'll need to be able to use them you'll need to be able to know the past participle form so that you can do the grammar exercises. And you'll also need to know the definition. Now, all of these words have more than one definition. Maybe you know a different definition than the one that's listed here. But for the purposes of our partial exam, any quizzes, and our final exam, this is the definition that you need to know. Okay? So, even though there might be more than one definition, we're studying this particular definition that's listed for the final exam. All right, I'm going to make some suggestions now for how to study vocabulary from a list. 1, make up your own sentences to give examples of how to use the vocabulary word. 2, flashcards are a great way to practice, but make sure that even if you practice with flashcards, you also practice by using the word in different contexts and trying to think up example sentences. And finally, look for patterns even when it doesn't seem like there are patterns. That will help you to memorize the forms, the past simple and the past participle form.